Good afternoon, everyone. C1 is a new organization that is devoted to its mission is to support and encourage pastors who have the very difficult job of leading churches, making disciples, shepherding people. It's a multifaceted job. It's a lot of hard work. It's very stressful, and it's a job that, like all jobs and all things, it comes to an end at some point where you make a transition from that main role as a senior pastor or lead pastor, and you move on to do other things as the Lord leads. And it's a process that involves a lot of changes. A lot of people are impacted by that transition. And we're going to talk about all that. Mainly, we're going to focus in on what is the impact on the pastor himself. And so we've assembled four men here this afternoon who have been in very impactful, significant leading roles in their churches. And I added it up, and combined with these four men, there's 135 years of experience. So there's a wealth of knowledge here that you're going to get today in the time that we have. I've really been looking forward to this. So what I want to do is just first introduce our panel. I'm going to just do it in alphabetical order here. I'm going to start with Mark Bowen. Mark, let me find my notes here. Mark has been following Christ since 1975 and was a pastor at Hometown Church in the Twin Cities of Minnesota from 1993 until his retirement in 2021. So that's 28 years, all right? And we're using that word retirement. I know for me, as a young Christian, I never thought of retirement. I thought I'm just going to serve the Lord till I die, right? And I think a lot of us had that thought. We never really planned for it. We thought, oh, the Lord's going to come back, or God's going to have a plan. He's going to take care of me, and that's true. He does have a plan. He does take care of us. But anyway, one of the questions I asked these guys was to define retirement, and I'll get to that in a minute. But let me just continue on with Mark here. In his role as a regional director for Great Commission Northlands, Mark served as a friend and mentor to fellow pastors and helped coach 5 church plants. Over his years in ministry, Mark was called to speak on a variety of topics, including leadership, community, marriage, parenting, and finances. And on a personal side, Mark's been married 40 years. He has 5 adult children, and he lives in Burnsville, Minnesota with his wife, and he calls her his mentor, Judy. I think if we were all humble enough, we would all refer to our wives in that way. They do mentor us, don't they? So thank you, Mark, for having the humility to put that in there. All right, next on okay, everybody know Mark. Mark, give a little wave here.
What's that?
Just give a little wave. All right, there he is. Okay. All right, Dave Lenander. He's had a wide variety of experiences in the number of churches and places that he has ministered. But in his testimony, he said he first found Christ in his freshman year. He committed his life to Christ, got disenchanted with the party scene at school, and committed his life to Christ, got involved with Navigators. Wasn't long before he took on leadership responsibilities there. That's where he got his world vision, and kind of entered into some of his gifting. And then later on, as he went into grad school, he met somebody from the Great Commission churches, and he settled in there. He was appointed as pastor in April of 1983, and he served over a period of 39 years. He retired in April of 2019, but continued to serve in a volunteer capacity until July of 2022. But he served in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, Berlin, Germany, La Crosse, Wisconsin, and I believe now Dave is in Ames, Iowa. But he's married to Sandy, They've been married for 46 years. They have 3 children and 13 grandchildren. So welcome, Dave.
Thanks.
All right. Next is Doug Schmidt, who is a part of what's called Barnabas Ministries of Michigan, and which is a similar, I'm going to have him describe that in a minute here. But that is a ministry that's similar to C1. After he left his position, he took over leadership of a nonprofit organization that does similar things to what C1 is doing. The only thing is they've been doing it for 18 years. Okay. So Doug is married to Carolyn. They've been married 48 years. They have 3 children and what he refers to as 7 nearly perfect grandchildren. I just got to meet my 5th grandchild earlier today. He was born a week ago. And I would say he's probably nearly perfect as well. He and his wife live in the northwest suburbs of Detroit, where they served for over 30 years. And after transitioning out of the lead pastorate of Woodside Bible Church, where he served for 28 years, he's now leading up Barnabas Ministry of Michigan. He's been doing that since 2018, excuse me. So, yeah, it's part of his story of transition too. So I'm sure he'll tell us about that. And then fourth, and on our panel is Dr. Bruce Terpstra. He's married to Darlene for 42 years. They have 3 children and 6 grandchildren. He served as a church planner and pastor for 20 years. That was the first part. And then he planted 5 churches between Colorado and New Jersey. He also served as church planning director and district superintendent in the Metropolitan District for 18 years, where he oversaw more than 70 church plants and oversaw 400 pastors. And currently he's president and founder of Consentia Group, a ministry that develops leaders in relational intelligence and spiritual formation, where they've trained almost 20,000 leaders. I'm one of those 20,000 that's gotten that training, and it's been good. Bruce has a master's in divinity from Denver Seminary and a doctor of ministry from Dallas Theological Seminary. Bruce enjoys a variety of activities, including golf, motorcycle riding. We've been on motorcycle rides together, fishing and kayaking. He also likes to create and build things. He's an avid reader and a lifelong learner. All right, so that's our panel. That is our panel. Thank you, men, for being here. So I'm going to throw out the first question. And before you answer that, I'm going to give your guys' definition of retirement. So here's the first question. What did you do personally to prepare for your transition into retirement? Now, retirement, I give air quotes to, and I asked each one of these men to define what is retirement to them. And Mark said, retirement is when you no longer financially are compensated. You're serving and doing ministry as a volunteer. Okay. Dave said, retirement is the process of reducing responsibilities and work tasks to compensate for declining physical and mental capabilities due to aging. Here's what Doug said. Retirement is a season of ministry where you move from position leadership to influence leadership. I like that. It is a sage stage where we help others through mentoring or coaching as the Lord gives health and direction. That's good. And here's what Bruce said. Some say it's not in the Bible, but the Levites were to stop doing some functions when they reached a certain age. Retirement for me is not having the pressure to work for my living, but that doesn't mean that I am not productive. Okay. All right. So again, the first question is, what did you do personally to prepare for your transition into retirement? I'm going to ask Mark to go first. And Mark, for sure, focus in on, highlight those 4 questions that you authored for your region.
Sure. some years ago, maybe prior to 2015, thereabouts, uh, in our region, we gave our all of the pastors 4 questions to think about with regard to succession. And I began seriously praying about those questions at that time. Um, I think I authored the questions. I know I helped author them. So those 4 questions are: what is your retirement goal? What's the dollar amount? Second question is, how close are you to realizing it? Essentially, what year will you reach that goal? And third question, what are the implications for your church salary? When could you walk away from it? And fourth question, if 10 years from now you believe the Lord would have the leadership of your church be something other than all current staff just 10 years older, what visionary, entrepreneurial, sacrificial steps of faith would you consider taking to help bring about a preferred future? So those were the 4 questions thinking about succession that we all began noodling on in our region some years back. Um, the what I personally did to prepare for transition away from my position was in 2016, I began to vacate 25% of my full-time salary. I voluntarily did that. Continued to work full-time, but at 0.75 FTE. And I began to seriously pray over and work at grooming a successor, specifically Kit Guerrier. So that's my answer.
Yeah, could you expound on that fourth question a little bit more?
Yeah. I think the implications of that question have to do, especially the words sort of visionary, sacrificial steps of faith. I think it has a lot to do with entrusting ministry, delegating ministry to others who may not do it quite as well as you think you have. They may not do it quite as well as you really have, at least not for a season. And it's very difficult when you're heavily invested in ministry. For many of us, it's difficult to delegate. And I think that's visionary. And I think it's sacrificial because most of us, once we find a niche that we really like or that we are good at, we get positive feedback for serving in that capacity. And it's a sacrificial thing to entrust that baby into somebody else's arms. So I think that's a very critical component of visionary, entrepreneurial, sacrificial steps of faith. It's delegation of what you might love doing to someone else who you can coach and shape and mentor and help. The other part of it, and this is, I think, a much smaller percentage of pastors that can do this, is to voluntarily, sacrificially vacate some of your salary before you retire. And most of us in the Great Commission world, at least, did some other work before we became full-time pastors. Few of us graduated from seminary as our primary post-secondary education. So in many cases, there's something we could do part-time if we elected to before retiring fully. But not everybody, that's for sure. And I think the answers to all of these questions with regard to succession are personal, and it's not formulaic. And that's why I think the fourth question regarding sort of, oh Lord God, what can I do to set the stage for a preferable future? What visionary, entrepreneurial, sacrificial steps of faith would you have me take? I think that's the most important question of all. These are hard questions to look at, especially the retirement goal. Lots of us haven't considered that carefully. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Mark. Dave, if you could go next.
Yeah, well, in my mind, I was thinking or shooting for somewhere around age 67, but circumstances were different for us. We at age 61, Sandy and I moved to La Crosse, Wisconsin. It was a church plant from a church in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. They lost their pastor unexpectedly, stepped down, the planting pastor. And so we didn't want to leave the team. There was a large team that came from Eau Claire. We didn't want to leave them in a lurch. So we just sought advice and wisdom, and we moved to La Crosse to serve that team. So we came into a situation that was quite complicated and challenging. And but we knew, even at 61, my main focus was not so much on retirement, but on raising up leadership, younger leadership, both for the health of the church and recognizing that we had really limited time to invest and how long it takes for raising up leadership. But over those years, for the first 3 years, we identified several people. But then 3 years into it, I was the only paid full-time paid staff person on the church. I was into a serious car accident, and through circumstances, it took 2 years to recover from that. And the guys in our region, Mark and Brent, and we've always had a very good working relationship, and they came alongside to help. But even through that process, I feel like it took an emotional and mental strain that I was recognizing needed to step out, but we did not have the local leadership there like we wanted to have for the church to continue. And so we came to the point where we wanted and needed to go outside of La Crosse for a pastor that could take the reins and lead the church. And so that was about, I don't know, 1 or 2 year process, wasn't it, Mark?
Yeah.
Yeah, for those of you that don't know,
so
Mark Bowen partnered with Dave in that process.
Yes, and that was very helpful because he had, through leading out in the region, had relationships and knew the younger guys, knew guys that maybe aspired to the office of overseer, but did not have the financial base. And so we identified a young man. Well, he wasn't really young, but he seemed to be a really good candidate, and he came down, and we felt like, since this was kind of a unique situation, that we wanted to overlap our times. And so the region paid for me to stay on staff full-time for a year after he came. And that's what we did. So at the end of that year is when I retired from the salary. I continued to serve with him on a part-time, but a decreasing involvement over the next 2 years. And so it was really good. He said he really liked that. He really needed that kind of input from a fellow pastor. At the same time, he needed to really take the reins of leadership. And so I consciously worked my way out of involvement so that toward the end, I really was not doing a lot of the pastoral leading.
Dave, if you could, talk about the pros and cons. There's a different school of thought that says, the founding pastor or the previous pastor who's stepping down should just step away right away completely to make room for the new man. Uh, but you stayed and you worked alongside and mentored him. What were the pros and cons of that?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I had read a book, I don't know, and I can't quote where it was, but I'd read a stat where somewhere, the traditional way in which maybe mainline churches would do it, they would have one of the pastors leave and the other guy comes and step right in. And I'd read the stat that it takes about 5 years for a church to trust that new pastor. He's got to build that, that trust. And so I always kind of poo-pooed that. And as we talked about it, though, we felt like we needed to have an overlap. And I think it was good. But for that 3 year overlap we had toward the end, I feel like it was too long. And my being there, something needed to happen. But our circumstances were such that we weren't ready to move on. And so I would say it was probably a year too long, but I think it was very valuable for having at least 2 years of overlap there. And again, and that was our situation, but and the pastor there really said it, that he valued it and wanted it, but at the same time, I could sense that my being there was a hindrance at the same time. So
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Okay. All right, let's move on to Doug. Tell us about your experience.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's just an honor to be with you, man. I'd always prayed to the Lord that when my time was up, He'd let me know first. I don't want to be in a position where the church had to let me know that it's time. And so as a result, we kind of monitored things on our dashboard. I looked for my own health. I looked for focus, that I stay focused. I looked at stress levels and how I handled stress. I looked at the new ideas. Am I coming up with new visionary ideas? And do I have finally the courage to pull those off? And if I saw any of those slipping, then I knew that it was probably time to step out. And my wife and I always knew what we were going to be doing after pastoral ministry, because for the last 30 years, we've had a burden for pastors and wives. So we knew it would look something like that. What I didn't anticipate is about a year and a half before we actually did retire from church ministry, that my friend Dick Sochacki died, who headed up Barnabas Ministries of Michigan, which is basically to encourage and resource pastors. So I ended up taking the leadership of that, and along with pastoring for about a year and a half, maybe a little longer. But what we've tried to do for years is prepare for that moment financially. We did a number of things to try to get ready. Our church had a matching retirement program, so we maxed that out. Whatever we could put in, we did. As we got raises over the last, I would say, 20 years, we refused to change our standard of living, but rather just socked all that money away for retirement. We just tried to save as much as we could, try to get out of debt as early as possible, so that financially it would help. Additionally, for us, it was helpful because our church was, as we processed with the leadership team what it would look like, they were as much concerned about what I was going to do next as they were who was going to replace me. So it was very, very affirming, and they also wanted to financially be a part of whatever I was doing next. And so that really helped as we processed the next step, the journey.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, it's I was going to ask you to, give specific things that you did financially, but you already did that. So thank you.
Mhm.
All right, Bruce.
Yeah, thank you, Rick, for inviting me to be a part of this conversation.
Mhm.
My situation is probably different than a lot of others because my last role before retirement was in a role that was an elected position. It was not a local church. So you could serve up to 12 years, 3 4-year terms. So I knew when my retirement was coming in advance. It was dictated. So 2 years before I was to retire, I began to equip 3 different gentlemen to take my role, not knowing and I didn't have the option to choose my successor, but I just made sure that there were people in place that could take over when I do leave. So that's the one thing that happened. The other thing I did was, or they did for me, is they gave me time to start consulting. I realized that, we all kind of have our specialties in ministry, things that we're passionate about, and the older you get, it gets narrower and narrower. And that's what happened to me. I realized my specialty was conflict resolution. I did not choose that. It's just what God put upon me and the places He put me. And so I was working really with relational intelligence, resolving conflict both on the mission field and in the local church. So I had been developing material and so forth for years. They gave me time to get away and to write. I left that DNA with the churches that I served, but it also gave me a platform to begin for my next stage of ministry. I didn't know that a week before I was to retire, I would have a massive heart attack and be very deliberate. So much pain and so much damage to my heart that I spent the next 3 months in critical care, not thinking I would survive. The doctors told me that, but so we had no income for a full year actually as a result of that. But because we had started this ministry 2 years before we left, and we were donating everything that we were doing back to the people that we already served. We didn't take like a double salary or anything. We just donated it back. We had actually income during that time. And then they actually paid for my health insurance for a full year after that, which was a real blessing to us and allowed us to get on our feet a year later. So that's kind of how our transition went. I'm an entrepreneur by nature. Another thing I did financially was we would buy and sell houses on the side. So my boys learned everything from their dad, and we would go in and renovate homes, and we would rent them for a certain amount of period and then sell them. So we had no debt when we retired, when we stepped out, we would have been probably in pretty big trouble if we had debt and we weren't in the position we were in.
Okay. Great. Okay. Question number 2, and we'll start where we ended up here with Bruce. What did your church do to prepare for the transition? I think you mentioned some of that, but let me just re-highlight some of that.
Yeah, so, being that I wasn't in a local church, I was serving 379 pastors. So I was more of an oversight role to a region of pastors. I was a pastor to pastors. That was my congregation, them and their families. So what they did is they expressed care to me by giving me that time to prepare for the next phase of ministry. So they gave me extended time. They gave me, I think I took about 5 weeks each year, so 10 weeks altogether to do that kind of preparation. They allowed me to travel and consult and to build a new ministry that was apart from what I was currently doing. So they were very gracious in that regard. And they actually told me to keep the money that I was doing in my consulting role, but we just felt it was not, there was a conflict of interest there that we really needed to be upfront. So we gave all of our finances over to the board that oversaw our ministry, and we asked them to allocate that fund to other ministries. And so that's what we did for 2 years.
Okay, so basically they just made sure you had time to get set up for what was happening after the transition.
That's correct. And I started to step back, which made my presence not as, when I left, it wasn't as noticeable and it wasn't as jarring to the organization. And I think that was very valuable as well.
All right, thank you. Doug, I think you also had mentioned some things that your church was doing to support you in the transition. But again, just highlight what did your church do to prepare for the transition?
About 3 years before we stepped out, the church, our leadership put together a rabbi trust fund, which is basically deferred compensation. And so in addition to my salary, they put in an amount every quarter for 3 years. And I think the purpose of that was to help bridge the gap between retirement and when Social Security kicked in at 70. So they were very generous, and it was very, very thoughtful on their part, which helped us an awful lot.
Yeah, that what you said there brings up a whole nother topic. A lot of pastors opt out of Social Security, and I know I did after I was recognized. And fortunately, I had a number of years teaching within the school system, so I'm still eligible for Social Security. But yeah, that's a whole nother
Mhm.
issue. So wonderful that your church was able to set that fund up for you,
Mhm.
right? Okay. Dave, how about your church?
Yeah, I was, well, related to our finances for retiring. I was very fortunate. God was gracious because along the way, a lot of the churches that I had served did not have huge amounts of resources. Um, Cooley Rock at the end, when we came down there, gave a good amount to an IRA, and so that built up for about 5 years, which was helpful. But God and the sovereignty, I had worked for 8.5 years for a governmental agency in Wisconsin. And Wisconsin has probably one of the best retirement systems in the nation, and it's fully funded. And so that money from 8.5 years grew for about 30 years. And so that's really provided half our income, a nice stable amount of income, because we opted out for Social Security. We get a little bit, both my wife and I. And then with the IRA, and we invested some inheritances over the years that we're doing really well. But that was good. The other thing the church did, well, financially, when I got in the accident, it was amazing because I wasn't able to work for a year, and they continued to pay me. And they were very gracious. We were challenged with over $400,000 of medical expenses that would have bankrupted us.
Hmm.
But we had to do a lawsuit to the gal that hit me and to recover that cost. And so those were kind of the financial issues there. But then the church also was very good at accepting the pastor that moved in, because again, that can be a hard transition for them to make. And so I think that was a fairly healthy transition there.
Great. So it sounds like your church was also very supportive and helpful.
Yes.
Okay, Mark.
Our church, from the time that I became a full-time employee, had a policy of matching up to, I think, $200 a month, whatever contribution I was willing to make to a 403B retirement fund. So over the years, that was very helpful to set the stage for eventual retirement. And there was also a bit of a wake-up call. I don't recall exactly, Brent, whether we actually implemented this policy, but I know we discussed it, and I think it was our intention to implement a policy, a church policy at Evergreen, now hometown, of mandatory retirement at age 65, absent a special Board of Trustees dispensation, suspending that policy due to a special or extenuating circumstance. I know we at least discussed that. I think it was our intention to implement it. I thought we did. I think in a way that helped me to face the music on those 4 questions. What is the number that I need? When am I going to reach that? And, what are the implications for my current salary, et cetera? What am I going to do in the meantime that's visionary and sacrificial and et cetera, entrepreneurial, to try to set the stage for a preferable future? I think it was very good, at least for me, to think in terms of I'm going to need to do something else at age 65 that salary won't be there. That assumption helped me to face the music. The church was very supportive, and my fellow pastors and the board and everybody was really supportive. My retirement came early. It was forced by chronic pain and an inability to solve some problems with my spine. So I retired earlier than I planned to. Church was very patient, very supportive, and I just felt loved and supported all the way through. I couldn't ask for better.
Sounds good. Okay, question number 3, and Mark will come back with you again. What impact has your transition had on you emotionally and spiritually?
My retirement from full-time ministry in February of 2021, it did come years earlier than I had planned for. And the impact was grief. It was sorrow. It was loss. I think that retirement brings that for most. In my case, I think it was a little bit magnified. So the transition emotionally and spiritually, I spent the next year purposefully processing grief. And I continued to volunteer in a limited teaching and coaching role within my church and region. But I left Margin to experience at the Lord's feet and in community with others sorrow and involuntary loss. The hurt that I felt physically was multiplied a little bit by the grief of prematurely leaving what I really did love doing. So I didn't stuff it, and I took a year. It was interesting. My wife and I had just about an empty nest by that point. One adult child still living at home. She really wanted to sell the house and downsize. And I thought it's so important to leave margin for grieving. I said, you can move if you must, but I won't. I'm not moving for at least a year because it'll be a ton of work to get the house ready, to downsize, and then to sell. And I don't want to stuff or bypass grieving. I want to grieve well so that I can come out of it in a position to really finish well. And I think it's very tempting to skip the steps necessary to grieve well. That's my opinion.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. God bless you for taking the time to do that, recognizing, being self-aware enough to recognize the need to do that. That's a good example for the rest of us.
Well, I do think retirement, it's every life encounters involuntary loss, every life. And generally Americans are not good at grieving, and Christians aren't much better. Generally, my observation, and I'm indebted to Pete Scazzero. One of his principles for emotionally healthy discipleship is expand your soul through grief and loss. I think he does a great job of developing that, and I am indebted to him. I think it's a very big deal. And I love what Henry Cloud says on the subject. If you get stuck in protest, if you don't process your hurt, frustration, and insecurity wisely, you will not be available for what the Lord has next for you, because you'll still have an attachment to what has been lost, but what you have not released. And I have seen that, and I didn't want to be that.
Wise words, definitely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dave, what
Yes.
impact has your transition had on you emotionally and spiritually?
Well, to me, it's been a tremendous, to be honest with you, just a tremendous release. And it's been very freeing to look to the future as to what the Lord might have for us. We are in the midst of a major transition. And so we moved out of La Crosse and moved down to Ames, Iowa. And we did that because we desired at the end of that period of pastoring of those local churches to get closer to our kids and our grandkids. And we felt that the future and our effectiveness would be most multiplied by investing in them. All three of my kids came to school at Iowa State University, and they came here. There was a good student ministry, and it was good for their lives and their spiritual lives. And then they moved on. Our son is in Kansas City, and our other son is in Lincoln, Nebraska. So just as we sought the Lord's wisdom on what to do, we wanted to get closer to them, and yet our roots were in the Minneapolis area. So then about a year and a half ago, our daughter and son-in-law in Ames, they were the ones left in Ames. They bought a 14-acre hobby farm outside of Ames here and asked us if we wanted to build a house on the property. So our daughter saw that it would be beneficial for them and for us, as they have 6 young ones from 2 to 12. So she's busy homeschooling mom, and we could help out and then as we get older, they could help out with us. Plus, it cut the travel time to our other 2 sons in half. So we moved down here, and very interesting, as we've talked to different people in the church down here, there's many couples of our age that have moved into Ames, and their kids go to Stonebrook Church, but they've done that to be closer to their kids. So it's not so much, kids moving to their parents, but parents moving to their kids. We've seen kind of a trend, and I don't know how big that is across the country, but it's been really enjoyable for us to have 6 of our grandkids right next door. And mom sends them over, and they come down to us, and they get a treat. They hang out. We play a couple of games, talk to them. She teaches them ukulele and do things that are just very building of our relationship. It's tough though when your 12-year-old starts beating you at these intellectual games and you can't beat them. It's kind of frustrating, but it's good to see them develop. So that's been something that's been really good, and just very, for me, for the last 2 churches, I was the only pastor, and so I felt the weight that everything fell back on me. And so when I was released from that, to be honest with you, along with the recovery from the car accident, it took a huge mental and emotional toll on me, and I really was worn out. And so to be released from that has been very freeing, and we look forward to the future.
Yeah, it sounds like the Lord has really set you up to enjoy those golden years.
Yes.
With your kids and grandkids. And and I noticed that you enjoy woodworking and metalworking.
Yes. Yeah.
How much of that are you able to do?
Well, lots actually. There's a 4,500 square foot barn on the property, and it's got a woodworking shop that
Oh my
my
gosh.
son-in-law and I combined our tools, and then he gave me the tack room for a metal shop. So
Oh my
I bought a
gosh.
welder, and I'm now working on making a land plane to grade the driveway.
Oh my gosh.
Mm,
I may have to come and visit.
You,
I'm a
you all be
woodworker.
welcome if you come through Ames.
Yeah, for
mm.
sure, for sure. Well, thank you. Enjoy those years with your kids and grandkids. Getting to
Yeah,
do,
we are.
yeah, that's awesome. Okay, Doug, what's been the impact on you emotionally and spiritually?
Like all of you, man, I loved what I was doing, pastoring. And a friend of mine once said that he leads so that he can preach, and I found my situation to be opposite. I preach so that I could lead, and so the leadership. I love the leadership. I love solving problems. I love our team, and so when I transitioned out, um, it was I could replace the preaching, but I couldn't replace the leading. And that's what so I'd always believed and taught that our identity is in Jesus, no matter what we do. But I didn't realize how much what I did really identified me and how much I enjoyed it. So I appreciate what Mark had to say about grief. I think I went through that, Mark, probably without identifying it. Um, uh, Emotionally, spiritually, it was good, because I had more time to spend with God and His Word. And I think the ministry God led us into gave us a sense that there was now time for multiplication, that I could accomplish more with a lot of pastors than I could with me pastoring a single church. So spiritually, it was fine, but emotionally, I had to work through some things, and it took a while. And one of the things I didn't do that I would recommend to others is that there be a time period between pastoral ministry and what you do next in the next season. A time to unwind, a time to process, a time in some cases to grieve. And I didn't do that. And as a result, it was prolonged.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's very helpful. Bruce, on to you.
I really connected with Doug had to say about the grief. My grief was delayed too because of illness, as already been mentioned. But after my heart attack, it took me a while. I was just glad to be alive. I just but for a year, I wasn't able to move on. So I would say, in addition to the identity issues of being a leader, which I resonate with you, Doug. I preach so I could lead as well. And I knew that in the next phase, I still wanted to have influence. I still wanted to lead. I wanted to solve problems. I wanted to address issues that exist in the world. I want to make a difference. I guess when we move from a place of strong influence to not sure what that's going to be going forward, there is that time of purifying your identity, reestablishing your identity, and realize, because you don't know what your identity is until it's taken away. That's when you find out. For some people, maybe identity comes in other ways, but for me, it came through the significance of leading and making a difference, and then that was gone. So there's some grieving in that regard. I had a mentor in my life who was a very significant leader. He was the president of two large universities, well-known author, so on and so forth. And he took me out for dinner about a year before my retirement. And he says, Bruce, be prepared that when you retire, you're going to become a nobody really fast. And those were really wise words. And he gave me some counsel in regards to that. I think we don't realize how blessed we are as pastors to have as many relationships as we have, and the influence that we have. And when you step away from that role, it does change. And it can even feel like betrayal, like all of a sudden the people that were interested in you are not calling. They're not, they're not as engaged. Now I moved 500 miles away when I finished my role to be with our kids, near our kids for the next phase of our ministry. But I would say that relational piece was another one that I had to work through. I just love having people that I was the pastor with and, an under shepherd with, and that was gone. And so that had to start all over again. So in the middle of that grieving was also the excitement of starting new. I was really excited about getting started on something new. Even laying in the hospital, I was dreaming about what was to come. So that's not everybody's wired that way, but those of you you can relate to that. And so to me, retirement was a new opportunity.
Yep. Great. And this next question wasn't in the original set of questions I sent you guys, but I wanted to take what Doug said about in his definition, that shift from positional leadership to influential leadership. What challenges have you faced in making that shift from positional leadership to influential leadership? And, maybe you've mentioned some of that already, but just reiterate it. Bruce, start with you.
Every time I get on an airplane to go minister somewhere, I realize I'm the oldest one on the plane, except when I go to Florida. That's a weird feeling, but yeah, sage kind of leadership. I still do cohorts of pastors, and I'm kind of surprised that people want to be with me and talk with me. It's still kind of a funny thing for me because I still feel like I'm their age and I'm wrestling with the same issues, and they're the same issues. It's a different world, but it's the same issues. So no, I didn't find it difficult at all. In fact, I have to be careful that I ask more questions than I give advice, but I'm finding this part of life pretty enjoyable, being with other pastors, younger guys. I have cohorts of guys that are they're in their first ministry as senior pastor. And those are the most fun. That's no doubt about it. So I don't know if I have a problem. I don't know if that was the question.
Or challenges, any challenges in making that shift?
I think I had been doing that for 20 years for me. Like that was kind of the way I did my ministry. So it wasn't a huge shift for me.
Yeah, it was one of those things that you really enjoyed doing and that
Yeah.
allowed you to continue to do it.
Yeah,
So it wasn't a huge change. It's just more focus on it.
correct.
Yep,
Correct.
that's good. Okay, Doug.
I find that once I transitioned to this stage of influence leadership, I found that there was safety in the structure, in the position leadership. I like that structure and had to adjust now to a different kind of structure and almost creating structures. We have a lot of mentor groups where I meet. Tomorrow morning I'll meet with 5 young pastors in my office or in our basement. And we'll go for 2 hours, and they really love it and I really enjoy it, and I feel like I'm multiplying myself, and I'm probably just as busy as my pastoral years, but with a lot less stress.
Yeah, Doug, talk about Barnabas Ministries, because talk about a position of influence. Tell us about Barnabas Ministries and what you do.
What we're trying to do is match up the men with pastoral experience with young guys who just desperately want it. So we have about 65 plus mentor groups right now. We meet once a month for 2 hours. We go through materials. It's all free to the pastors, but they open up their lives, they open up their ministries and their families. And so we're trying to be on the preventative side of the pain. We do some restoration work. We have retreats for pastors and spouses, cohort groups, and we do a podcast that comes out every Monday. But the bulk of what we do, our bread and butter really is those mentor groups.
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, an opportunity to have a huge impact on especially the younger pastors and
Mhm.
yep, to share some wisdom and experience and give them a platform to just share with others.
Rick, the statistic I've heard over the years is that 50% of pastors don't make it to 5 years.
Hmm.
And to me, that's tragic.
Yeah.
And impact on their own family, their dreams, their visions, and the church itself is huge. And so anything we can do to help these young guys get through and get them entrenched in ministry, we want to.
Yep. Yeah, that's very similar to the heart of C1 and our mission is raising up healthy leaders and mentoring these younger guys who are up and coming. So let's move on to Dave. What kind of challenges have you faced in that shift from being in a position leadership to influence leadership?
Well, not a lot, because to be honest with you, I always struggled with, I was not a strong natural leader. And yet I was always put in situations where um, no one was stepping forward. So I said, okay, Lord, I'll do it. I think there's other guys that could do it better. But so I just really um, used my relationship with the Lord and example as kind of the way to lead. And so I did that through mentoring, through building groups of men, building other groups, and so yeah, that was not a big thing for me, and I feel like I can continue to do that now at this new church. So one of the things we're doing, my wife's very hospitable, and so we come into a new church as a uh, pastor emeritus, but we wanted to go slow. We wanted to really build relationships with people, and that's what we're doing, having folks over. It's been very exciting. I guess maybe that's part of the way God reached me was through the Navigators. It was through mentoring and personal touch, and so that's kind of carried out in my life, and so it's very exciting. And there's a lot of good things going on in the church here. I met with the two of the pastors at Stonebrook here, and one of the things they said was that that's kind of a weakness in their church, and so it's a way I can fill a role here. Like the other day, my wife fed. They've got a real dynamic student ministry and international ministry, which has risen up in recent years from having died way down. And so she decided to feed 60 college students at a guy's living room. And so we did, but it was so fun just to get there and be an old dude and all these students asking you questions and sharing your life and your testimony and what the Lord's doing. And yeah, it's been really very stimulating and exciting.
Yeah. So your example, it's seems like it's the Lord is, even though you don't have that position, leadership position, you certainly have a position of influence
Yes.
at Stonebrook, using just your gifting, your personal makeup and motivation, and just the way you go about influencing.
Mhm.
And he just put you right where it was needed, which is really cool to hear. It gives us all hope. There's life after the pastorate, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Sounds like really good life. Yeah. Okay, Mark.
I would say that thus far, 2 years in, the biggest challenge for me shifting into a role as an influencer, as opposed to actively pastoring full time, the biggest challenge has been having to. Well, I'm fading physically faster than I hoped, and I'm in more pain and it's not solvable. So I've had to let go of things more quickly than I wanted to. The hometown guys had the door open for me to write message series and to contribute, and I did that the first 2 years, and I can't do it anymore. And that was complicated my grief, I'd say. So, and I'm sleep deprived chronically from this pain. So I would say that's the challenge.
Yeah.
It's also a huge opportunity in this sense. It brings the fallenness of the world to my doorstep, and it shows me my true frailty and the depth of my need for Christ. I overworked most of my career, and I wish that I had repented earlier of self-sufficiency before losses mounted, but I wasn't wise enough.
Yeah.
But I'm making up for lost time, and the joy of the Lord is my strength. But that's been the greatest difficulty, is the fade has been faster than I hoped.
Yeah. What comes to my mind is what Scazzero talks about, using the word limits to really understand our limits and the grieving that is involved. And for you, Mark, with that physical ailment and the limits that that's putting on you, like you said, it's come a lot earlier than what you anticipated.
It sure has.
Yeah.
And
But for all of us as we age, we've got to embrace the fact that we're going to have limits. It's going to get smaller and smaller, right?
Mhm.
yeah.
Thank the Lord for afternoon naps.
Absolutely.
Amen.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. And okay, we'll start with Mark. What advice would you give to a pastor so that he can be prepared for retirement?
Well, some of the guys that I've talked to, most I would say, have waited longer. They wish they would have started earlier to look at the money, to take a hard look at what is the number that I need? What's the retirement goal? So what advice would I give? I would say, with respect to finances, prioritize saving toward your retirement goal. Force yourself through that decision matrix to figure out what number is reasonable. Force yourself to go there, and then seriously prioritize it, even at the cost of some ministry, even at the cost of some ministry, if necessary. And for some guys, it may be. And guys might have different opinions about that, and some might say that's blasphemy. You're called to ministry. Well, you're called to provide for your family too, and not doing so with appropriate foresight, a case could be made that undermines your credibility in ministry. I would encourage facing this fully. The other thing that I would encourage is ask Jesus for a successor. Start early, and ask for one that'll lap you, and that you will, and ask for grace to not resist or envy somebody who might lap you. And I'm very serious about that. Lastly, actively decouple your identity from ministry along the road to succession. And how that is done, I agree with Bruce. You don't really know for sure what idolatrous attachments you might have that you gain identity from until they're taken away. I like how Keller says this. Great setback and great success tend to reveal the things we value too much. Great setback, great success. Well, in ministry, everybody eventually faces some great setbacks, some great losses, some great heartbreaks. Let God use those to shape you, to reorient your whole life around Jesus, when great setbacks come. And if you're shattered by great setback, your identity was tied up in that thing that you lost, and you better face it. And if you are seduced by great success, your identity is too tied up in that thing you were given. You better face that. I think you need to actively decouple identity from ministry along the road to succession, or you won't do a good job of succession. You really won't. And I could give you a story or two, but I'm not going to belabor that.
Thank you. Very wise words. Dave?
Yeah, I would just say that to start developing, a team that will lead, identifying guys to lead, as Mark was saying, early on, and giving them responsibility. And so you really can't start that any too soon, so that it really frees you up. I was fortunate to be, I made 3 major moves. One was Mark Bowen asked us to move to Berlin back in 2005 as they lost a pastor there. It was a church plant from the Minneapolis churches. And fortunately, we had a team that, I could step out of that. And we did that. And it was very stimulating to our lives and our faith. And then when it came time to move to La Crosse, we were able to do that. And the church continued to do well there. And so it was really good to be flexible. And it's the same is true when you come to, wanting to retire. Along with the finances, it's really, it's so important to have a team in place that, there was a different situation. We had to get a guy from the outside, but to be able to retire, you really want to leave the church in good hands.
Right. In your written response, you wrote to me, you said, as far as advice to give to a pastor so that he can be prepared, you said, be patient. It will take much time and patience. What are the specific things you think about that require time and patience?
I got to think about that.
If you need time to think about it, we can come back.
Well,
Do you want-
okay. I'm just trying to think what I wrote.
Well, I think in the context, you were referring to raising up successors. And I think it kind of goes along with what Mark was saying about letting go and entrusting leadership to people who may not be able to do it as well as you think you do it.
Yeah, exactly. I just think that, we need time, and we need to be patient with them, and we need to be patient with ourselves too. And, it's a work that the Holy Spirit does,
Yep.
and he's at work doing it. So, it just, I guess the main thing is it just takes time to raise
Yep.
up solid leadership that will have the heart and the passion to continue the ministry that you've been leading and working with.
Great. Thank you. Okay, moving on to Doug. What advice would you give to a pastor?
My advice would be you can't start too early to prepare financially for retirement. And so and I look back at some of the things we did, and I certainly resonate with everything that's been said already. But my wife and I on the side, she has a teaching degree, but when the kids came along, that occupied her, and she stepped out of teaching school. So we on the side flipped houses like I think Bruce was talking about, or exotic cars, that kind of thing. And I wanted to do that for a couple of reasons. One, I thought I had a little bit more entrepreneur juice than what the church could absorb without causing difficulty at that time. And then secondly, I thought I could do it and help with some of the kids' college bills and that kind of thing without it distracting at all from ministry. And it worked. Very few people in the church even knew that I had another revenue stream coming in. So I would say to pastors, start early. Your ministry is your first calling, but if you have margins to do that kind of thing, it doesn't hurt. I think as well, I would encourage pastors to take a good hard look at what they enjoy doing, their gifts and their passions, and to see how those can be implemented post pastoral work for some type of ministry. Consulting, teaching, mentoring, that kind of thing.
Very good. Bruce has written a book called Three Passions of the Soul that he uses with the Concentric Group and the work that he does there in relational intelligence and training up leaders. And he has what he calls prepping for retirement essentials. So I wonder if you could expound on that, because that fits right in with advice that we would give.
Yeah, I talk about three different things: the need of the soul. We all have these needs, and of course, Christ is the one who meets all those needs. But the first one is security. We all have a need for security, and God has given us the skills and the talents and so forth, and we need to exercise those, certainly, but we also need to trust God. And there's a balance in all that, right? We can be so consumed with our retirement that we don't trust God, but we can be so dependent on God and then we're not do anything about it, not use wisdom. So there's a balance in all that. I would just say that the church is in our retirement plan. As a district superintendent that oversaw churches, I saw too many pastors stay way too long. Like their retirement plan was their church. And I saw churches take dives, and it just was not pretty. I don't think it glorified God, and we want to avoid that situation. So our security ultimately is in Christ. We can trust him. But I have actually my best friend right now, he's got no retirement. He's 67 years old. He's trying to start a business because he's got nothing. And I just, it's a tough situation because it's, he's going to have to continue to work through his retirement in some shape or fashion. It's just kind of hard to start fresh when you're 67 years old. The second one is acceptance, which has to do really with relationships. It's belonging, and I think that in retirement we don't only need security, but we need relationships. We need people around us that we can enjoy. We're totally accepted by God, certainly, but I could tell you one of the greatest joys is just being near our kids. I know that's not possible for anybody, but when you think about where you're going to retire and how you're going to retire, sometimes we think about location, but location is not as important as relationships. So I just throw that out there to you as you're thinking about retirement. And then the third one would be this concept of significance. I think that our significance is always the same, whether we're in pastoral ministry or not, or we're retired or not. Our purpose is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. That's our significance. That's, do everything unto the glory of God. And we can do that in retirement. It may look a little different, but we can dream about what that may look like. And it sounds like each person on the panel here has kind of figured out how to do that a little differently. But our production doesn't stop at retirement in terms of bringing glory to God. And whether that's sitting with a grandchild and giving counsel and playing a game and pointing them to Christ, or if it's meeting with a group of young pastors and helping them deal with the struggles that we faced years ago with some wisdom, I think we can continue to be valuable to God's kingdom in an ongoing basis. So those are the three things that I would mention around those three concepts.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. I believe we do have time to open it up to questions and answers. If you guys have any questions that you want to bring forward, now is the time. Don't be shy.
Rick, I've got a question for the panel.
Chris.
Chris Martin, I'm in Columbus, Ohio. What were the proactive things that you did to help set up the your successor to really be successful? Especially if his gift mix will be slightly different than yours.
I'm not going to call on anybody. You guys just,
Okay.
when you've got a thought, go ahead and share it.
Well, in my own case, my successor's gift mix is similar to mine, which made it pretty easy. I think my greatest contribution to help set him up for success, I think he would say this, was to tell him what I saw in him that made me believe in him, why I had great confidence in his match for a leadership role, teaching role, counseling role. And I've told him, and I never tire of telling him, here's what I think you do really well. And I think you're going to lap me. I think you already are. And I celebrate that. And any way that I can support you, help you, use me, feel free. I think that affirmation is like oxygen to a guy who's stepping in. And I don't think you can give too much of that as long as it's real.
Good.
I think for me, it was bridging the gap since our saints didn't know him and needed to adjust to him, that I tried to, in as many situations as possible, to reaffirm my trust in him and how he was a good man and a good leader, and just really support him with the saints. And so that was the thing I think I did the best in transitioning.
As we were looking for our senior pastor, Amanda, to step in when I stepped out, the comments of our board were, we need to find somebody that can do what Doug can do. And my comment to them was, no, you need to find somebody that can do what Doug can't do and take this church to the next level. And the Lord answered that prayer and gave us an outstanding leader whose gifts are much, much stronger than mine. And he is leading the church really well. He's asked me to stay involved. So I'll preach occasionally, I'll teach. He wants me to stay on in 2 or 3 different areas, the last of which was to consult him. And so I consult him whenever he asks. If he doesn't ask, I don't volunteer information. And every time I have a chance publicly, I'm his biggest cheerleader. And to him privately, I'll listen to him. I attend the church yet. And if I listen to a message, I'll text him and just let him know how good it was.
I think there's already been good advice. The only thing I would advise is more like after the fact. Don't undermine them after you leave. There's so much temptation that will come your way. You'll get phone calls of people complaining, and just listening creates, you're giving empathy and they're taking it as support.
Yeah.
So just be really careful not to undermine unintentionally. I've also given access, like the pastor, you have access to me anytime you need it, both before the transition and after the transition. I'm here to serve you. So if with that attitude, I think it works well.
Thank you. That's very, very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else have a question?
I was just going to ask quickly about, as you were thinking about transitioning out and into something else, what were some ways that you chose, or what guidance or input can you provide in the way you chose your next, the ministry you were going to go into? If you understand my question. How did you choose what you transitioned into?
Maybe, what did that process look like?
For me, it was a no-brainer. It's what God was blessing and what I love to do. It was like that narrowing, right? It's like, why would I do? There's a lot of things you do in ministry that you're not really gifted at, or it's not your passion, but kind of finding that narrow spot. To me, that's one of the blessings of retirement. You don't have to do it all that. You can just kind of narrow it down.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that C1 has as a value, is helping guys to figure that out early on. What is your gifting and calling, rather
Yeah.
than wear 20 different hats? You know,
Yeah. What do you delight in?
yeah, what do you delight in?
Yeah.
For me, it was listening to my wife. I was kind of thinking out there that, oh, I'm not going to retire. And she'd say that. And, she'd ask specifically, what are we going to do in over a many months period? And finally, the Spirit knocked me up the head and said, address this and talk this through. And so we started engaging in conversations together and then praying over these things. And it really was at least a year process where we came up with the plan that we did, and we felt it was very Spirit led, but it was through not me ignoring, but listening and addressing her concerns, that she had real valid concerns, and was much more practical and specific at trying to work through those things. So that was something that finally got through to my thick skull.
And for us, it was the same as Bruce's, where it was a passion that we had to help pastors and churches. And so we knew it looked something like that. We didn't know if it would be an organization or if it would be formal versus informal. But one of the things that I had to process, Gregory, was what speed to go at retirement. And that was really, really important. I've spent 35, 40 years in the far left lane and loved every minute of it. My wife was in that lane with me, but that was not how she's wired. When it came time for the next season, it was time to say to my wife, you choose the lane. And so it's been hard. That's been the hardest part of retirement. Letting her choose the lane. I still drift left.
Downshifting.
It's easy to flunk retirement.
We can succeed at everything in life and fail at retirement.
Thank you. Thank you. Mark, were you going to say something too? Mark?
Well, I agree with I think it was Doug's statement earlier, maybe it was Bruce's, with regard to what God blesses and what you love. I think that's a really good trail of breadcrumbs to follow. And what I'm focusing on now, I started in 2010. And I'm really glad I did. I didn't really start to do it with an eye on retirement, a key contribution, but the Lord knew, and it is something I really enjoy, and God has been blessing it.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Dean, did you have a question?
Oh, I was just thinking, this just rubs me, the word retirement, I'm just not sure we should call it retirement. You guys are all contributing
Yeah.
in a different way, contributing, coming alongside your children and your grandchildren and other leaders. And I don't know. I just don't know if retirement's the right word, but
It's the sage stage.
It is. It is a little bit of transitioning between the king and the sage. Yeah, but I wanted to say I just appreciate all of your learned experience and transparency. Mark, gosh, brother, that kind of transparency is so refreshing. I just can't thank you enough.
You're so welcome, my dear friend.
I got a quick question.
I was going to say real quick, the terminology we've used that without having to use the R word, if you don't like it, planning for old age.
Planning for old age.
Yes.
I don't like that word either, Tom Old.
That comes and you better plan for it. Whether you retire or not,
I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm with
Yeah.
Yeah, I just had a question around, did any of you guys stay on an elder board at the church you were leaving or, retiring from? Or did any of you stay on staff, go to part-time staff rather than, I know you shared some of that, but I was just wondering if you could maybe flesh some of that out, talk about lessons you learned or things you would do differently.
I stayed on an elder board as long as I could. I'm no longer actively functioning in that regard. We had already had that same group of leaders together for several years. It wasn't difficult. And really the hardest part was just not being able to contribute as much as I wanted to.
I don't serve on the elder board, and I kind of resisted even the thought of a pastor emeritus. We chose not to go that direction because I just wanted the new guy to have the ability to lead without people in the room looking my direction. And so I think that's worked out real well. My predecessor, who pastored there for 18 years, and then me for 28, we're both still in the church, and we're the present pastor's biggest cheerleaders. So worked out really well.
That's awesome.
Yeah, Dave Blum.
Yeah, maybe from the other side, what's one thing that your elder team or board or whatever, however you terminology, what's something they did to help facilitate your transition? What was most meaningful to you?
They gave me a nice celebratory retirement party. And it was really fun.
Yeah.
Maybe prior to that, the lead up to that, like what did they do to help you and climatize either you or the church to this huge transition?
One of the things the church did for me was that rabbi trust that I mentioned earlier, but probably 16 years ago, they came to me and said, what do you really need? What do you want? And I said, nothing. I've got everything. Everything is great. And then I thought about it and called the chairman a couple of days later, and I said, everything is great as long as I live. I can take care of my family, but if something were to happen to me. And so what they did then is they took out a life insurance policy, not a life insurance policy on me, a key man policy, but it was church. They took out a policy, a 20-year policy. I'm hoping I'll outlive it, but that was a tremendous benefit to me, with just a peace of mind that if something were to happen to me, that my wife would get an insurance check.
Thank you.
Rick, this has been a great time. I think
Fantastic. I am
trying
so,
to
I'm
put
full.
this out.
I'm just full.
Yeah, yeah, what a wonderful, and again, as we've been talking about it within C1, there are multiple transitions that different people go through in life, and some of the stages are, some of the concepts are similar. The fact that there's an ending to something, there's a grieving, and then there's something new. And so as we plan out the rest of the year, one of the things we want to do is look at other major transitions that people are going through. Some people, like my son, my successor, he is looking at this saying, well, you know, it's not for me. I'm like, well, man, you're just going to buy a house, have a child, and there's a lot of things you're getting ready to go through. That's a transition. And we want to make sure that we're looking at those other areas of transitions as well. So we're going to have more of these types of calls focused on different types of transitions. And then this is, I'm really excited about this. Later in the summer, Seth Broadhurst and the rest of the healing team are going to do a whole day Saturday where we talk about the emotional needs of transition generically. And then we'll have breakout sessions for people who are in different the different transitions. So you'll have opportunities to be involved in smaller groups like this, focus on the things that you're specifically going through in terms of transitions or planning for transitions. So again, and talking about raising up healthy leaders, this is a big part of it, is making sure that that next generation's ready, but also making sure we're ready for the next phase, whatever that is. So we're really thankful for all of you guys who spoke. Just a fantastic job today. And so we really thank you for that. And so we'll be letting you know when the next ones are, if you want to join or have some younger leaders join some of the next ones. And then it'll either be at the end of June or in the middle of August. We'll have the whole day Saturday, and it'll be recorded so you can watch it as well. And this is recorded also. So if you know somebody who is interested, who this would really bless, feel free to forward that to them. It'll be on the C1 YouTube channel. We'll put out the link on our socials and in the next email. So again, thank you guys so much for joining.